All right. So tell me about this strange education you're pursuing.
Strange education. That's quite the common viewpoint for people from outside. No, I am in Denmark at the the Necessary Teacher Training College, as they call themselves, which is a somewhat aggressive name. But once you get more into it, it starts to make more sense. It's a 4-year it's a 4-year teacher training course. Um, with a extra year at the beginning, which they call the saving up pre-course, which is essentially a practical year. And I can run through it, but it is it's founded on an idea of a more modern, more current way of helping people learn and trying to train teachers for that. I mean, I know you're familiar, but for the viewers, my parents founded a program that's based on a similar principle a long time ago, and I grew up with it. So I am one of the lucky ones here that this idea is not very new to me when I got here, but for most people it is. But to start from what it is, a lot of education, even very modern education, is based on a system, is based on a person's usefulness to society once they complete it, you could say. Um, which is not a bad principle, but DNS, as it's called, Det Nødvendige Seminarium, which is the Danish translation of the name, is was founded on the idea that people don't really need to be taught. They learn by themselves if they're given the space and the correct tools to do it, which is how they would like us to teach and also how we are supposed to learn. So I'm right now halfway through my saving up pre-course, which is a really interesting thing in itself, where they have a system of you can come here a year before you start the actual bachelor and work in pedagogical jobs which they have contacts for, to which is of course great practical experience and then also pays for your studies. So I don't have to pay for anything. I spent the first half year working in an institution, which by itself is very interesting. I'll talk about it later. For criminal and marginalized youth, which I have now unfortunately had to leave, and I'm looking for another job for the next half of the year. But that is now where I am. I'm halfway through that, and then uh, and then you begin the actual program. And there's a lot to how this works. I don't know, where would you like to start? We spoke before a bit about the way they run money, which is very different.
Yeah. Will this year for you fund the entirety of the coming years, or are you going to work a bit throughout as well?
A bit throughout as well. Well, the way it works is there's an initial fee that you, if you don't do the saving up, that you pay when you begin the bachelor, which is about in SEK, it's about 120,000
Mm.
right now. That changes. And so that is what the saving up year is paying off.
Okay.
And then once you join the program, the 4 years, it's all in the plan. Like you have a teaching practice in the third year, which pays quite a lot, which funds you. So whether you do the saving up or you pay yourself once you're in the program, um, it's all part of the program. So there will be different ways that we get money from places, but you don't have to bring anything else.
Hmm.
And I will go through the curriculum if you want, like how it is year by year and what we do.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about what you've done so far, then,
hmm
to start with, and we
So
can move
I
on later.
yeah, so I got here in August, and quite a few of us did. We're 13 people now who are on the saving up pre-course out of the current 23 in my group. The rest of them will be paying themselves. And we got here in August. I think we're having issues here.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of lag. Are you experiencing it as well?
Yeah, I
As
think
well?
connection issues.
Yeah, we'll just try to deal with it if.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm. Give me 2 seconds.
Yep.
There we go. I I changed the network.
Mm.
All right. Well, as I was saying, we arrived here. We got to know the team a bit, and then you have to distribute jobs. And there are partnerships with DNS from previously, which every year they take first year, like saving up year students to work for them, and they know DNS, and these are like different schools in Denmark. And then
Mm.
there are some exceptions, or we are a lot of people and we have to find more jobs. I was one of them. The place that I went is not a direct collaboration with DNS. I found me and Simon, a teammate of mine, found a different job at a place called Søgerhus, which is, like I said, it's an institution for troubled youth, you could say. And working there was very interesting. I I also had to leave it eventually. Um, I suppose it would be accurate to say I was fired, but there were no incidents. It was more that my work there ran out, and I'll talk about that because it's quite a difficult place, but it was very interesting. Um, they have where I was about 23 kids between the ages of 14 and 18 who have who are there for a variety of reasons. Some were there because of very high drug usage from a very young age. Some had family issues. There was self-harm. There was suicidal tendencies. There was quite a few fighters. Like it was very having to try to keep people motivated. And that was the interesting part because when I went, we were warned that these people are a bit crazy, the girls are manipulative, the guys are extremely hard to control, and we were warned about many things. And none of those things ended up being particularly difficult. It was getting people to do things that was by far the most difficult thing there, which I already thought was very interesting because there were occasions when there were drugs on the campus and we had to move people out because they didn't pass tests or things like that. There were one or two occasions where there was threats of violence or violence. There was a lot of the very usual teenage drama. But that was not the problem. The problem was that all of these people were hurt in some way and they were
Mm.
and so the only way that they could think of to stay away from that was a lot of nicotine and a lot of television. And getting them to actually do things was very difficult, sometimes not even possible.
So would that be like activities, or are you trying to get them jobs and stuff as well?
Both activities, they go to school or either on campus, we had a school, or outside, some of the older ones. And those that did not, we were trying to get jobs, but also activities, because Denmark has it in common with Sweden that these kind of government-funded agencies are very well funded, and in this case, 100,000 krones per month per kid, which is a lot of money. So they had everything. They went on trips to Egypt, to Zambia. Like they took the kids to Zambia to an orphan village, and it was a disaster. It was very rich, very hurt Danish kids in a loose in a place with a completely different economy. By the way, they had a lot of money as well, and so that was an interesting trip, and that was, I think, for me the thing that made the biggest impression of me, or how shut people were, because like I my partner who I was working with there often made this joke that he should have just moved to Denmark and then beaten his parents or something to come and live in this place because what they did was absolutely amazing, but the people there, no use of it, which
So,
was
so are they there like in your school slash institution 24/7? They like live there.
they live there.
Yeah.
Some of them they go home to parents on the weekends. if they can. Some of them are there because they cannot see their parents, and then they don't. And there was some of them are under witness protection. Some of them there are different things, but that is their
Yeah.
home. They live in the institution.
Mm.
And
What about the coming years that are more focused on your education, not other people's, I guess?
yeah, exactly. The coming years, well, I gotta prove to be very busy because I will now. I recently got a new job as a personal tutor for a girl in Copenhagen who is also has similar family issues, which I'll probably be working until the end of the year, but that is just another job. And then I can go through the curriculum of how it looks.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because so in the first year, you begin, and then it's always an interesting thing at the beginning because the saving up team transitions to the studies, and all the people that pay themselves arrive. So you rebuild the team. There's a new team, and you get to know each other. And this word team is very important here because there is a lot to that team aspect because you do everything together. Like the best example, and I think I'll take this now, is the economy because we have common economy at DNS, which is one of the things that people from outside it find so, I don't know if confusing is the right word, but it's definitely original because it's basically effective communism on a small scale. Once you join the team, we have two bank accounts, one for income and one for expenses, and all the money that then everybody generates is there. And then we have three people who are responsible for economy on the team. They handle the money. And everybody has responsibilities, and those are already divided. So I'm communications and document responsible. So I've been handling the registrations like in Denmark for everybody on my team and things. So it's a community living where you divide responsibilities, and the team works like that, and the whole community works like that. And it takes some getting used to, but it's very, very interesting. And so everybody has to kind of get used to that.
How's it been so
And
far? Do you find it like challenging?
mm, yes, challenging sometimes, but it's just a different way of doing things because you don't think as much as an individual because if I need something, like I buy nicotine and personal things myself still sometimes, but otherwise, like if I'm going somewhere where there isn't food, like on the campus, I make a food budget. I plan how much money I need. I send it to Simon, my teammate who's in charge of economy, and he sends me the money. Like it's all documented
Yeah.
and put together, which is a good thing because this is like part of the principle of working together as a team, but it also, of course, has to run and not just be trust and mind based because it would never work. So it is actually quite a well established, solid system. But but that has been, but I think what I've found the most challenging is the team aspect outside of economy, in like the fact that let's just put it this way, saving up here there are calculations. I need to make 85,000 kroner in a year. You know, there are calculations, but the real calculation is the roughly 2.05 million Danish kroner that my team needs by the end of the year. And so like it's back and forth, and it's interesting because some people are making just enough or even not quite enough money, and some people are making quite a lot more money than they need to. And it's still just common economy, and that aspect is interesting where it stops being an individual thing, like you can't compete anymore. And that is really interesting. And for some people it's hard.
Hmm.
And and people are like, no, I want to handle this myself, and I don't want to, and they don't join the team calls, and then the teachers call them and say, listen, everybody's wondering where you are, and it's like, oh yeah, it's us now. And you would think not. You would think that you'd be able to just share the money and move that way. But once you're trying to do something, 20 people together, you actually have to stay in touch and going all the time. And that's actually much more interesting than you would think.
It's hard to contend with the idea of like equal opportunity when the input or like the effort from different individuals is also different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you all are supposed to get the same thing, but some people put more into it, so that can be
Yeah.
hard to contend with. What do you think about that idea? Why is it like why is there an emphasis on that in your program? Do you think it's beneficial?
I think it's beneficial mainly because the undercurrent is that things are valued on the amount of effort someone puts in rather than how many kroner or how many hours, because I I am good with documentation, I'm good with law, I can argue with governments, I speak Danish, so like I handle the documentation side of things because I do it faster and better than other people. And then there are other people who can do other things. So if you're putting all your effort into it, and for some reason me or somebody else can do more than you, it's not relevant here. And I think that's beneficial because the reason we're here is not to get rich. The reason we're here is to educate ourselves. And if someone being less capable than someone else in a particular field of work is going to stop them from doing that, then we're not doing something wrong. That's at least is how I take what I take it to mean, and I think most people here would agree with me. And that's, I think, the biggest reason why it's beneficial, because then there are always things that you can find for somebody to do.
Yeah,
People have different kinds of skills,
interesting.
and so it's very collective.
Um, it's gonna be traveling a lot, like
Hmm.
going all around the world. Do they have
Yes.
their own places, or how does that work?
The only place that's directly owned by DNS is in Mexico. They have a resort there. The story of that is a bit of a strange one, and there's a lot of controversy around DNS in Denmark. I'll talk about that as well. But there are a lot of connections. Like there is something called the Teachers Group, which DNS is a part of, and which is how DNS was founded. So now we're going a bit into the history of the program. So the Teachers Group currently is about 4,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. And but it used to be less, and it was just literally school teachers who decided to start a commune where they would have common money, common ideas, work together from different parts of Denmark and eventually from all over the world to create a network for starting programs, sharing ideas, being better teachers, basically. And that is kind of where all of and this came from. And then at the same time, they started the traveling folk high school in Denmark, and from that also came DNS. And DNS has been around since the early 70s. It's not new as such. And wait, I lost my train of thought. Give me a second.
What about for your
So
group? Like, what does it look like? Is it all scheduled out? You mentioned Africa is coming up.
that is scheduled out. So, but just to get where I was going, there are teachers group members all over the world, and most of them are working in schools with alternative education and who are running interesting programs of their own. And so we have a lot of contacts, and it will be a lot of those that we will visit in Africa as well. So along the West African line, there are several places run by members of this teachers group, which also there are members of the thesis group that run DNS. Um, and we will be visiting them. So there are schools and care homes and things in Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Morocco, Senegal that we will be visiting. So the travel, which is in November, starting November this year, will be like we drive down with 2 buses through Europe and into Morocco. And there we will be partly stopping at these places and also doing investigations. And the way it works is there's DNS and then there's ISET One World, which is the bachelor with the National University Mozambique, which are the ones that have this bachelor. And so we do that online and then we do the DNS studies and they go together. And so they give us some things that we have to do on that travel. And then we do some things ourselves to send in to them. So this investigation is interesting, which is like a method that they use at DNS a lot, for example, where you decide on something you want to figure out. You want to figure out, like, what is the level of female involvement in politics in Senegal, let's say. And then you go out and you say, okay, how are we going to ascertain that? Like, you can ask people on the street what they think about the question. You can go and ask like like women working in different positions and like try different levels, like questions about politics to see what their answers are. You can arrange an interview with one of the local politicians there and speak to them about it. And then you can do research and then you write like essentially a thesis, but obviously not like a bachelor thesis, a shorter one, and then you hand that in and that's your investigation. And that is a method. That's something that we'll also be doing a lot of there. So you drive, we get to, I don't know, Rabat, and there are 2 days where people do some type form of study task, and then we will of course have visits where there is a planned schedule.
Have you got any ideas for what you would like to look into?
I have many ideas. None of them are so certain now, but I am quite interested in like political awareness in those countries, and also like how conscious people are of their position, because I've always been interested in global economy. I can highly recommend a book called Debt by David Graeber and David Wengrow. It's a extremely good layout of how economy works from the bottom up. But I studied a lot and I spoke a lot to Vandana Shiva, who is a woman who worked on this a lot. And because she came and lectured at my parents' program many times about what happened with the Green Revolution in India and the big agricultural companies, and they ripped the Indian economy up from the ground, and now they have managed to restore themselves. But the damage they caused was huge, and the same thing is currently happening in Africa.
Hmm.
Like just shipping natural resources out of Africa isn't driving the economy the way it used to, so they are trying to take over monopoly there, and it would be really interesting to see if people are learning from what happened in India. I don't know how familiar you are with the Green Revolution, but I'm sure you heard of it.
Yeah, I guess you can go through it a bit if you want to.
It was well, it began with Monsanto, which when they figured out how to genetically modify organisms, they made genetically modified seeds that give higher yields initially, but they are dependent on pesticides that work only on those seeds and kill everything else. So essentially, what they did is they just made a very potent poison, and then they genetically modified a series of growing crops to be resistant to that poison, which nothing else is resistant to. And then they marketed it in India and they sold it to everyone, and they managed to legally engineer that they had the rights to the seeds. that were genetically engineered, and then they very quickly, in the space of a couple of years, replaced almost all the indigenous seeds in India with their seeds that they owned the rights to, and then they could incur whatever royalties they liked from farmers who were using them. And for farmers to be able to use them, they would have to buy their pesticides because the seeds had no resistance to the Indian ecosystem. So they put
Right.
the entire place in an economical headlock, and then of course things began to develop resistance to these seeds as well, pests. And eventually it ended with about 250,000 farmers' suicides in Punjab in 1 year at one point, and pulled the country into chaos.
There was something about those kind of seeds as well, or maybe it was the pesticides that you mentioned. But I think there was like they don't reproduce, so you can't take the farmers can't take their own seeds, right? They need to always buy them, like they become dependent on.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. This is what I meant with the with replacing the seeds. They would genetically engineer these seeds to give a higher yield, and these farmers had no idea that the pesticide they would need to continuously buy expensive pesticides, and that their pests would eventually develop a resistance to those pesticides, and then if they tried to go back to seeds, there would be so much glyphosate in the ground that they'd been growing in that there would be nothing that would grow there apart from Monsanto's genetically modified crops. So they get essentially put in a headlock,
Mm.
and they can't afford to pay off debt. They can't afford to buy things to grow their own stuff again, and the farm that they owned, the earth is just not fertile enough anymore. And this happened to a huge amount of people. And the cherry on the cake was that when you signed a contract with Monsanto, you signed like it's a bank contract. It's not the way they operate in India. So they would get more and more and more in debt trying to keep their farm going, and eventually they would get so much in debt that the company would seize their land.
Mm.
So Monsanto took ownership of an enormous amount of agricultural land in India this way. And eventually,
And you're
the
interested
only
in
way,
how? Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
No, go on.
I was the only way they actually stopped it was the Indian people actually really pushed against it in the end, and eventually the government caved and they banned Monsanto's products in India. Full stop. It's the only place that that ever happened, and that was how they got out of it.
Mm. And the same thing looks like it's about to happen in Africa.
Mm, people are more wary, so they're not able to do it as quickly, but they are. Mm, these places are usually quite into feeding themselves, you know, it's a self-sustaining system. And they are globalizing Africa very quickly. Already most of it is, which is not intrinsically a bad thing. I'm not an anti-globalist in any way, but there are dangers with it because if you become dependent on a system that you don't run and you don't know how to navigate that, then like I see no reason why these companies would not do the same thing that they did in India because it is very, very lucrative. And I'm certainly going to be asking and researching this a lot on my travel because I'm very interested to see how aware people are of this. If the farmers are thinking about seed sovereignty, if they're thinking about um, biodynamic farming, and by that I don't just mean like the German invention biodynamic, like really ecosystemically friendly farming that does not eat into the arable land gradually. If they are aware of these things that are being practiced in America and Europe now, because the companies have realized that even they cannot afford to just use things anymore, but they will not have the same concerns for Africa.
Mm.
So I think farming, just because it's such a cornerstone of society, like if you control the agriculture of a country, you control the country because they have to rely on you to deliver food to them.
Yeah. And how would one go about like investigating something like that? Is it just interviews with individuals or
That would be my place to start.
yeah,
I would certainly I would research it more. I would want to walk into that house knowing that I may know nothing about their job and how to farm in Africa, but I know about ecosystemic services. I know about the political background. I can ask them intellectually relevant questions, if you like. But I would also, but then there's different ways of interviewing because another thing that I would do is I would go to a farmer and I would say, could you please tell me about your job? Take me around your farm and explain to me everything about what you're doing and not just the work, but also why you do it and how you know to plant this here because it will stimulate water flow or growth and all of these things. And then you hear how much they actually know, and then you can ask, have you thought about I would then probably ask, have you thought about incorporating more technology into your farming? And then the answer is very interesting because sometimes people are cautious and sometimes people say, yes, I just got these seeds that double the yield, but also I've started to grow more weeds and the water is becoming dirty and things, like,
yeah,
and that's the kind of answer you always got in India. They wouldn't put them together. And this is what Vandana Shiva also talks about. They would say, my water is getting unclean and there are much more weeds and bugs and the plants around the farm are not growing anymore, but the harvest is huge, so I'm happy, you know?
mm,
And and I think the difference is that there's more defense against it now because this was in the 80s when this happened in India, people knew there was no concept of genetically modified seeds,
yeah,
people knew how nature worked because they worked with nature for hundreds of thousands of years, and now they were given a different kind of nature that actually isn't really nature. And so now in Africa, I think it's less a question of just being given something so destructive that it gives somebody else control of your land. I don't think it will happen that easily. But nonetheless, um, the offer of just selling everything you own for commercial prices, which in these countries are often excellent pay, um, is very tempting. And that will probably be where I start to see how many people are doing that.
you mentioned like a separate organization or partner or whatever that you will be doing education like online through.
I set one world, the
Yeah,
the university that we work with, DNS in Mozambique. Yes, it's essentially distance learning, and then we are learning by ourselves. So if I remember correctly, um, DNS was founded as a training college, and in the beginning it was approved as an experimental uh, project by the Danish government. So it was funded by the Danish government to experiment with this particular way of teaching. And it was very successful, and the teams grew. And then eventually it became so successful that it scared the government. And they did everything in their power to shut it down. And eventually they made a law specifically for this place to try to shut it down. And so they lost all government funding. And there was this enormous scandal where, because the whole teachers group has this common economy as well. And then there was a small group of people, I think five and one accountant mainly, who left, and this accountant fleeced a lot of money off the group, and then the government used it and accused the whole group for tax fraud. And um, they actually acquitted everybody in that case except this accountant. He was sentenced sat a prison sentence, but then the government arranged for the case to be re-raised, and that case is open till today. And not that much is happening with it, but DNS cannot get funding because they're still technically in court with the Danish government, and the people who are accused are not in Denmark; they are in Mexico. Because if they come back to Denmark, they will be arrested, and they were already acquitted. It's an unconstitutional case, so they are not coming back. So it's a bit of an interesting situation. But when they lost that
Yeah.
funding, it was that they then looked at, okay, the program is the important part, but we would still like to give a bachelor's degree for it. So then they made this arrangement with ICET One World in Mozambique, who will work together with DNS and look at our material and give us tasks, and then they actually give us a bachelor in pedagogy for this
Mm.
program. So it's an arrangement essentially that we can get papers for this.
Right, like what is it called? Certification or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So what will that teaching entail? Like you're going to become teachers.
yeah, that paper is a teacher training certificate. So yes, I can, if I want, I can teach in a school directly after this
And
program.
are you going to like specialize on subjects?
That depends on what you mean by that. Like, it's a bachelor's degree, so you write your thesis on something, but as such, you don't specialize in, the certificate is the same.
All right. But
Like,
what? So you won't become like a math teacher or a physics teacher or something like that.
well, I can teach, like, once you've completed this program, like, I can teach anything on like a base school level,
Hmm.
you know? There is no such thing as a bachelor in math teaching. Like I don't like you
Does that
you
have to
get
be a
this teacher,
master's
and
or
then
a?
if you want to teach at a folk high school or something that is a after school level, that requires a specialization. And if you want to teach at a university as a professor, you need a PhD.
Yeah.
So there's like levels to it.
Hmm.
But anyone, like when me and you were in school, anybody teaching in that school just has to have a teacher training degree, like have done a bachelor as a teacher.
And a master's, right?
For high school, then comes the masters, yes.
Okay. Hmm.
So that is like my option. I can also do a master's and then I specialize in a area of teaching, or I can join a form of a project, because that's also what a lot of people here do, because the network of DNS is huge, like hundreds of thousands of people working in connection with this program and different projects all over the world. And that means that you visit them, because in the first year we have this Africa trip and then study months, because every year we have months here where we're doing this, the actual bachelor, like online as well. And then the second year is European reality. In that year, we go to European cities and work either with connected programs or with things we find completely by ourselves. But we choose a city, we live there as the whole team, and we essentially work in pedagogy. In the third year, we have teaching practice, and then you are supposed to find a job as a teacher or pedagogue. And by the way, for all of these things, it's we have a lot of support, but it is our responsibility, you know?
Yeah. To organize
But
like where you're going and what jobs and.
exactly. But there is a promotion office, and we have teachers who have been doing this for years and years and years and know a lot of people, and so it is not like I am thrown into the Danish job market and expected to figure it out. Like it is very well held, but it is nonetheless expected of me to do it and to use the help that I can get rather than expect someone to help me do it for me, which is also kind of the premise of the program. It's
Right.
your responsibility, and we're here because you wouldn't be able to do it on your own, probably, but it is nonetheless your responsibility.
Mm. And
And
you wouldn't
then
get the accreditation if you weren't part of some sort of overarching.
institution, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that is the third year, it's a 9 month teaching practice. And there you are with one of these, often with one of these connected programs. And then the fourth year is international teaching practice, and that you can go anywhere. So the people are currently doing that are in, the two of them are in Colombia, there's one in Japan, there's one in Brazil, there's one in Zambia, there are three in Europe, one in India. They are everywhere
Mm.
at different programs. And there again, like they are hired as teachers. Either they have a school class or they are working with criminal youth, or they are doing some form of pedagogical work and not as an assistant. They are the responsible. And once you've started the program, that's where you're put. And then it's done through the institution because you can do that. It's like an internship, right?
Mm.
So then I can work as if I already have my degree. And it's on the responsibility of the institution that sends me.
What are you looking forward to most, do you think?
What am I looking forward to most? That's a very good question because I'm looking forward to a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And there's also different reasons why, and it also reflects the reasons I came. Because on the one hand, I'm looking forward to taking a bus through West Africa, like apart from anything else, and just with 20 people who are already very good friends of mine. And that's just going to be very fun, regardless of what we do. And I'm also looking forward to like push myself,
In what way?
and figure out new ways to push myself. Because one way to push yourself is just do more, arrange more, organize more. But being under pressure and making things happen is something I'm good at, and I can always just learn to be even faster at that. But that's not actually very difficult. What I discovered this year already is I was at this school that I was working at. I was put in a position in the last 2 months where so much was happening with these kids that as a pedagogical assistant, so not a responsible, there was very little for me to do because all of it was very official work and quite difficult. I was called as a witness to 2 court cases in 1 month. Uh, like, so it it becomes an issue of having nothing that you need to do, but it being expected of you to be useful and constructive and to find a way to do that. And that is much harder. And to get up in the morning and know that nobody is going to ask me to do anything particular. None of these kids are going to get up and do shit if I don't really get them to. And I still have to get up and find something to do or create something. And eventually I agreed with my boss that there was no point in me being there. But I learned a lot. And like that, for example, is something that I want to get better at that you just don't get to experience in school. And I feel like in a normal university, you wouldn't get to experience that either. Because you have papers to write, you have homework to do, you have lessons to attend, you have all of this, And one thing that I'm definitely excited to get better at is what if I don't have all of that and I still have to make something happen? What
Mm.
then? And this year, I kind of had never done that before. And I was there and I was like, oh, well then, what now? And then you have to really start thinking.
Is that where the concert comes into the picture?
The concept that I was just organizing, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that, for example, that was a big relief. I mean, that was just more the fact that, um, for better or for worse, I've already developed a bit of an organizer reputation here. So like it was quite sudden. There's a winter concert here every year. There's events that they have. They have this, which is a huge concert that is organized in the winter. There's the Peace and Justice Conference, which is what like the name suggests, a conference on peace and justice where they invite lots of different people. That's hosted in the spring. Then there is an Olympics with schools from all over Denmark. It's a big sporting event with like 600 people here on campus, which happens every summer. And this time it was the concert, and we were having to set up, like, make final preparations in a big opera hall in the north of Denmark. And one of the organizers came to me and said, Finn, can you please take a couple of people, go up there, figure out what the hell is happening, and then set people working. And I was a bit like, okay, but it's also quite nice to be trusted with things like that. And that's also a big thing here where no one really cares once you're here what your credentials or experience are. It's like, can you do it? All right, make it happen.
Is it, do you invite people, or is it like students who are engaged in music and stuff like that who come and perform, or?
So the concert,
Yeah.
mm, it's both. I mean, it's a very, it was, immensely enjoyed the concert. There were a couple of professional opera singers, an enormous choir of 60 people from Poland, and an entire symphony orchestra. So it's like it was a very, let's say, not entry level event.
Professionals.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody from DNS who's available, not currently working or somewhere on the other side of the world, is there. But then we invite all sorts of people. It's open for Danish people to come and see it. There are people from all over like Africa and Asia who work with DNS who become invited. And it's also like a vessel for cooperation between or collaboration between different members of this teachers group, because I've noticed that since I came here that these big events that they host function as a way to maintain these connections within the group where all of these then collaborations with DNS and everything else happens, and they also make new ones. So the people here who are in charge of this concert also make a point of inviting people that they want to discuss things with to the concert, and then building new connections. And I've noticed that there's not, how do you keep a group of thousands of people like firmly connected so that all of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of collaborations keep happening? And this is how they do it. They do it with big
Opera.
events that everybody has to cooperate to organize, and then you basically just make everybody talk.
Yeah. Hmm. So what did you do, like, in this process?
During the arranging the concert.
Yeah.
Well, I got there and someone told me there is an entire exhibition of statues that we're going to be setting up that you need to help with. So there's yet another collaboration with a big community of sculptors in Zimbabwe and Zambia who work together with DNS. And let's see if one of them is sitting right there in the garden. That's very bright, so I don't know if you
Yeah.
see it.
No,
But
not much.
but there is a collaboration with them, and we buy their sculptures, which allows them to work their trade, because otherwise they would never be able to afford to just do art in Zambia, in a country with a collapsed economy. And then we sell them here, and there was a huge exhibition with like 50, 60 sculptures to be outside this concert. And so I was put in charge of that, and we had to price them like well, put in charge. There were others there as well who were part of the project, and then I was there from DNS to show them like, okay, this is what's going to be happening. And so then we were doing that, and then the Polish choir arrived, and nobody speaks Polish. And then one of them spoke German, and they said, you speak German. Show them where you go. And so I had walked at the head of a huge pack of Polish people, uh, trying to find someone who actually knew where they were supposed to go, and just like it was
Problem solving.
problem solving, exactly.
Yeah.
Something I enjoy doing.
And a bit of human mule labor.
Indeed. But yeah, but the fun part is like I went to the winter concert. I walked around there. I met a guy who works in a school outside of Copenhagen, and now I have a job there, very likely. Because I told him I'm looking for a pedagogical job. He said, "Oh, you speak Danish and you're with DNS. I have a student coming that you could be a personal tutor of. Let me have a meeting." Like so, and this happens on a small scale, and it happens on a big scale with these events.
How come you speak Danish?
Well, I speak Swedish, as you know, and I've worked in a Danish institution for 5 months, and for me that was enough.
Okay, yeah.
So I spoke Swedish to them, and they understood 40% of it, and then I long ago lost the ability to be socially awkward. I don't know how to do it anymore, so I just spoke horrendous Danish until it became less horrendous, and now it's pretty fluent.
It's pretty brutal for Swedish people, I feel like.
Yeah, it takes a while, but I speak German as well and Dutch, and like I can mix the sounds and make
Yeah.
it work.
Yeah, you seem to have a brain for that, like crazy verbal IQ, I feel like.
Like languages actually work very well for me. Like I'm learning French right now to try to, like I say learning, like I'm starting to learn French to to be able to speak it
Mm.
somewhat by November, because a lot of this West African route is French speaking.
All right.
And we don't have any native French speakers on the team, so we need some people who can at least communicate.
Where are the people from in your team? Mostly,
Where
would you
are
say?
they from? There's only one person from outside of Europe, from Brazil. She has Julia. She has a Portuguese passport, so she can join, and that is the big weakness of DNS, because it's such a long program, and because it's not recognized by the Danish state. They cannot take people who do not have European passports. It's something that's
Mm.
being actively worked on all the time to try and get around, but right now it's not possible. But there are people, there's another person from Sweden. There are a lot of people from Eastern Europe, which is interesting. We have 3 Hungarians, 3 Bulgarians, um, Lithuania, Estonia, and then Germany, Spain, Portugal. I'm blanking. Um, my girlfriend, who's also on my team, is from Malta. Um, Nobody knows where I'm from. You make it up. I'm half English, half Dutch. I was born in Switzerland and I grew up in Sweden. And but it's quite spread all over Europe. Italian we have, so a widespread. I think it's a bit of a shame that we can't have people from outside of Europe, but apart from that, it's very broad. A lot of languages.
Yeah.
Polish.
You have, as you mentioned or alluded to, grown up in this sort of environment, both
Mm,
like globetrotting all over the place, and also through
yeah.
your parents' little school had
Hmm.
had people from all around the world at your disposal. What do you like so much about this, like global traveling business?
Where do you start? It's exciting. I mean, like once I spent 15 years in Sweden, like if I'm given the choice of staying or getting on a plane to the other side of the planet and seeing what's going on there, then that's an easy choice for me. given that I don't have a family or anything that I have to stay for, you know? So that's that to begin with, that's just a very easy one. But then I love talking to people. I love talking in general, which a lot of people know at their cost who know me well. And I will just go and see what places are like and have fun. And I am a person who gets bored easily, which is a bit of a weakness, but it can also be a strength because it means I'm always looking for more things. And as for Yip, it basically meant that I had that in my backyard. I had people from all over the world all the time. I spoke 5 languages fluently by the time I finished school, largely because of Yip. I had friends everywhere in the world. Now, whenever I go traveling, I went to Australia. I had to make 4 visits in my first week because I knew people all over Melbourne, like,
Mm.
which is also great fun. It means if I want to go and travel around Brazil, I can cancel out rent and have good company because people live there that I know. Um, it's a huge advantage. It means if I want to start a DNS project, do a month-long investigation in Austin, Texas, I call a YIP participant from 10 years ago who is running a Connect Cafe in Austin, Texas, who has a place that we can stay and a massive network of people who are working on social change in the city already. It's 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 lucrative and fun, and motivation is not hard for that. And then, of course, you have so many stories.
It's a lot of opportunity,
Hmm.
but it's a lot of uncertainty as well. That doesn't bother you.
No.
No.
If uncertainty bothered me, I don't think I'd be here.
Yeah. Do you see any backside with it?
Any downside with the program,
Yeah. Or with like the sort of,
the traveling?
yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a downside, but you don't get stability, like you said. You don't get so it's a lifestyle that, like I said, I don't think it's a downside, but I am aware of the fact that if I want a family, if I want children, if I will have to give up at some point, at least
Mm.
to a certain degree. Because of course, like people say, you can still travel with your wife and kids, you can still do all of those things, but the ability to just take a phone call, book a flight, and fuck off, which I have now, I will have to give up at some point.
Yeah.
You know, please tell me by the way if I need to be careful with swearing or something for
Oh no, that's no
the
problem.
channel. Okay, and so that is maybe not it's not a downside, but it's something I'm aware of.
Like in the long run, maybe a thing you have to be aware of at least.
Yeah, and of the fact and just knowing when to commit, I think is a bit of a chess game that I will have to be playing a bit later in my life. Is that I love this living like this, but at some point I will have to deal with the fact that I will I will want things for my life that I will not be able to get living like this, and that means that I will have to find somewhere to be and live and operate out of, and that's of course not something that you get for free, and so I do have it at the back of my mind that at some point I will have to pick a line,
Hmm.
but I think that's still quite some distance.
I guess it's a good balance then because you get the opportunity to live like that, but you're also pursuing like um, a source of that stability. Like if you become a teacher, say, or whatever, I guess it
Hmm.
could turn into anything with the sort of context you get now. But
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I like my father is a big inspiration for me. Like I'm certainly inspired by what he actually does, but I'm more inspired by the fact that he traveled all around the world. He just did shit for years and years and years. Like he worked as a stage technician in the Goetheanum in Switzerland. When he met my mother, he was working as a stage technician in the Goetheanum in Switzerland and founding Connect, which is a global network for young people to start programs or like a support network all over the world out of that place in Switzerland, alongside that, together with a huge team of people. And then he started more and more to think about education, and he realized that, or he started to really believe this, that education is the most important thing, because if people don't have the right education and if they're not allowed to learn freely the way they should, then we are going to be in trouble, because a lot is wrong with the world. And he believes, and so do I, that the solution is in education, because people are not stupid, they just don't know. And that was his vision, and he found more and more people who shared that vision, and he eventually found enough people who were committed enough that he thought, I could actually start a program around this, around global realities. And then he looked into it, and he went to Sweden, and he did a few test years, and he realized, okay, then this is now my life. And that has, I respect, if anything, more than anything specific about what he does. And that is kind of how I imagine my life going. And that does not mean that I will be running a social entrepreneurship training like my dad by the time I'm 40, but that is kind of the picture that I have in my head.
Mm. What does global realities mean?
It's an extremely broad term. When I say it, I kind of mean, like, you can take it very literally, like the reality of living in the world that we live in today. And Yip is a really good example of it, because the courses are very fluid. Like there's one week there is a course on that's called Being Human in a Technological Age, which is like a philosophical and technical dive into technology, the effect it has on us, the significance it has for us. And then the week after that, it will be biographical counseling or some form of spiritual science or biodynamics or anything, you know? So the ideology is really that there is no ideology. You bring the ideology, we just bring the stuff. So
It's like learning to contend with the overarching
mhm,
um, tendencies of contemporary, like the
yeah,
contemporary world, I guess.
exactly. So if I imagine myself as running Yip and you are coming to Yip and we are having a conversation about what I am offering you, then, and what I expect of you, then it would be a bit along the lines of the fact that I'm not very, I'm interested certainly, but I'm not concerned with trying to make you an engineer or a psychologist or anything like that. In fact, not at all. It's like, it brings back to this: people don't need to be taught; they learn themselves, because you are who you are, and you have already and will create an image of what you want to do, and what you don't have is all the information for it. And so you come here, and I will just try to give you two things: lots of food for thought that I think is relevant, that I think is fitting for the time, that I think you will find interesting, and the space to process it and to do with it what you will. And then I expect you to be able to do that. You know, like, and so at least I believe that in real education, I don't need to tell the person I am teaching what they're supposed to think about what I'm teaching them.
Mm.
Like if you're interested in working on, like, agricultural economy, on this is the green revolution, on sustainable farming to counter the shit that is going on right now, then I what I can do for you if I'm your teacher is to give you lots of information and to give you people and to give you all the tools to find out everything about that. But if I tell you, okay, so I would start with interviewing someone from the government, and then maybe I would build a lawsuit, and maybe I would build a program to teach farmers about this and this and this, and I can give you all of that, but what am I doing here? Am I trying to teach you how to run my ideology? It makes no sense. And
Right.
this is what I think is wrong with education, is people try to teach you how to do things rather than just to help you learn. Because if you if somebody writes up a blueprint for a podcast and gives it to you because you want to start a podcast, it doesn't really bring you anything. It's more that you talk to people, and then certainly you should talk to people who run podcasts because they know a lot and they will give you things. But eventually it's you that's going to start the podcast. So if you are not figuring out what you want to do, then you won't get anywhere because you're running somebody else's shit. And that's kind of the idea behind everything.
So I've to some degree got the sense, like in the three sort of institutions I've been a part of in my educational life and just life in general, that there are a lot of people who really struggle with sort of interest, or there's a lack of it. There's a lack of curiosity. Do you think that that's an approach that could work for everybody, and they just need to be prodded a bit harder, like in the curious muscle? Or is it for some people who really are like seekers?
That a little bit depends on what exactly you mean. I think that the approach of of I guess, yeah, coaxing out what somebody wants to learn is common for everybody. It works for everybody. That does not immediately mean that everybody should go ahead and do DNS, like, or do a program like this. This program is suited for some people, not for others. For sure, because some people need a type of structure that you don't have here. Like, but the principle I think holds. It's more that everybody has a different way of doing things. So like for someone like me who grew up in a community who was raised to question everything, and who, this works perfectly for me actually. But for somebody who, if somebody in their 30s who has completed a civil engineering master's at a standard university and then sees that there is a political struggle in Mozambique around like housing and wants to assess that, and then they want to learn how to do that, then to just be thrown into DNS with much younger, it won't work, you know? So the principle stands, but it's different for everyone. And sometimes you kind of have to do it yourself. I don't know, I don't really know. I'm a bit lost on how exactly to explain it. I have an image in my head, but to me, it is really, I always go back to the idea of that I don't like calling myself a teacher because I'm not taking a blueprint that I have in my head, like if I'm in this position, and putting it on you, which is what a lot of people try to do. It's like you, if I was to be teaching you, you would already have all of the baselines for what you want to do, and just you're essentially here so that you don't have to do all of that research and all of that figuring out on your own.
So what would be your tools? Like questions? Or
Questions, exercises, like I would, like maybe if we're doing, it's like if you teach someone farming, like you would teach someone all about the ecosystem that we're going to be farming in, and how the animals and the plants and the microbiome works together, and how like the food chain works with nitrogen and carbon, and then you would explain to them what we're trying to do. So we want to make this grow. We want to, and and then you do an exercise. You say, okay, we're gonna plant things here, and then you let people do it, and then afterwards you ask, okay, so why did you do all of these things? And then you say, did you remember this? Did you remember that you have to fertilize it because there's nitrogen? Oh shit, yeah, okay. You know, so if people understand what is going on, then
They
it
can
becomes a
they can put
difference.
they can put like two and two together, and through trial and error, you get the strongest foundation
Exactly.
on your own.
And not only do you get a stronger foundation, but it's also your own. And then you build your own skills in how to handle things. And in pedagogy, it becomes even more important because if you present me and a teammate with a kid who is brutally addicted to their phone, who has a history of weed smoking, and and we have to try and motivate them to do things, there is no blueprint that is going to work for both of us because I will try to get them to train sports because I'm good at that and I'm good at motivating people to do that, and I will try to, and someone else might. I have a teammate who's a jeweler who has worked with art, and they might try to do art with someone, which I would not do because I am not a very artsy person, and I would not trust myself to try to motivate somebody else to do that. You know, maybe I would do it with them. Maybe I would get them to teach me to do that if they knew
Mm.
how to, and do it that way. But then in pedagogy, it becomes even more important. You discuss and you investigate about the way somebody works and the way they are motivated, and then once somebody understands that, then they get to try and figure out how they can relate to that. And I think the same thing goes for everything.
Mm.
And I find it really interesting with these things because in a way they're so basic. Like, of course, you have to let someone learn, but when you actually look into how that works, there's a whole process to it.
Yeah, it becomes harder when you have that perspective, like of individual learning what the role of the teacher should be, because it's so obvious when in like a more traditional approach where it's like, here is truth, here is falsehood. Uh,
Hmm.
it becomes easier in some ways and more complex in
You
others.
definitely make life harder for yourself.
Yeah,
That's
or
for
I
sure.
guess you have to be more discerning, like
Hmm.
rather than just dogmatic.
Exactly. Because and I kind of am learning or wanting to take that approach to life in general now that I'm here, because you can do it by trial and error, and I like to call it living by consequence, where you do things, and things that work you do and things that don't work you don't do. And then you just live like that. And that's fine, and that's how most people do it. But like for me, you can also live life trying to understand why things do and don't work, and then use that understanding to make it work next time. It's essentially the difference, right?
It's like the definition of learning.
Can you say that again? It was cutting out a
it's
bit.
it's like the definition of learning.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just the two kind of philosophically different ways of approaching things.
Hmm.
And it also makes things harder. Like I can take an example of being in a relationship. Like is it like which is always a very good example, I think, where you can either just like something can bother you, like balance of affection, or and you can just say, okay, well then I'm just not going to do it. Or you can ask yourself why. And the punishment you get for asking yourself why is that every time it happens, you have to replay in your head why it is, and and act accordingly. And the same goes for life. So I think what happens then is you it means you have to admit that you're wrong a lot, all the time, and instead of just changing your behavior because it feels right. But the way I see it, it makes things more energy dense. It's harder to live that way, but it's like talent versus effort in a sport. You have the ability to reach a level at something that you don't otherwise if you that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Finn, thank you so much. Looks like you've got an exciting couple of years in front of you.
Definitely.
We'll have to check in again after Africa.
Yes, and I would be happy to come back and talk about it.
Yeah. See you then.
Yes, we will.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.